Ever wondered who the fuck thought a leprechaun would make for a great horror villain? Well, now you can ask who was loony enough to think he would make for a great comic too. Like New Line Cinema was the house Freddy built, I'm sure Trimark was trying to bring in the dough with their own scary booger and exploit him however they could to get him accepted into horror fans' hearts everywhere. Aside from a board game I'm not even sure ever came out or not, Trimark Pictures also released an obscure limited collector's edition comic that I think might have been available at the video stores, but I don't know. Who the fuck made this? It looks like a middle schooler had their art inked with a fat magic marker and then colored with paint pens. And it keeps going back and forth from half-ass attempts at realism to fuck it kind of doodles. But I have to say, as horrible as this looks, I think it has charm that appeals to me. Somehow it reminds me of John Arcuti's art from the first Mask series published by Dark Horse with its sequential flow in colors, but don't get me wrong, I mean, this is like third world country knockoff of such fine art as that. Even its size is more magazine cut than comic, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does make it tougher to put away with your other comics. Now, as far as the story goes, this is an 8-page prequel to the first Leprechaun movie that tells of farmer Dan O'Grady finding gold at the end of a rainbow on his farm and cashing it out at the pawn shop for a ticket to the US. Of course, the Leprechaun comes looking for the gold and finds out the shop has been selling bits of it to everyone in town, who he then has to hunt and kill in bizarre ways to get it back. The last piece to retrieve is the one farmer O'Grady used for a gold tooth, so the wee little man hitches a ride in the cargo hold of O'Grady's plane and follows him to the US to the point in the story where the movie actually starts. Obviously, some continuity issues here. If you remember the movie, O'Grady was visiting Ireland when he captured the Leprechaun and then took his gold from him back to his home in America. Now, I don't know what the miscommunication could have been in this piece of shit to muck up the one and only detail they took from the fucking movie, unless they were working from an earlier draft of the script, but come on! Looks like this thing took a day or two to throw together. They couldn't make some corrections? What the fuck? It was a long time until Leprechaun got another shot at comics, but it really should have just been left alone. After his unofficial foray into comics in '92, some lame-ass company called Blue Water Comics revived Leprechaun again for print in 2009 with a story I absolutely loathe. One thing you can either hate or love about the Leprechaun movies is that they're not afraid to drop our favorite Emerald Munchkin into any situation. Vegas, space, the hood, continuity, fuck, they're just dicking around because they can. With that said, if you can tolerate all that kind of jumping around bullshit the series does, then you might enjoy this. We get a 4-part miniseries that's pretty much Leprechaun meets Lord of the Rings. We're now being introduced to this whole backstory the Leprechaun has in whatever fantasy times when the Leprechauns were at war with some magical lollipop race of mini-monsters called Chloricon? Is that how you say it? Anyway, the fantasy bad guys have stolen the Leprechaun's gold and sold it all around the world to weaken him so he can finally be defeated and end all Leprechaun kind, or some shit like that. The Leprechaun finds himself teaming up with a kid that bought a piece of the gold off the internet after he's been marked for death by the other walking orc shits because he simply saw them. Before you know it, they team up with his LARPing Renaissance fair buddy and a woman the head nerd works with that has tons of knowledge about obscure Leprechaun lore that so happens to lend itself to their particular situation with some of the longest, most boring pages of dialogue I've about ever seen that interrupts other semi-interesting action scenes. I mean, what the fuck is this? This really should have been something else because this is not a Leprechaun story. He's making buddies with these nerds and actually caring if the head nerd connects with the folklore chick he's got the hots for. I mean, this isn't anything horror at all. This is essentially a superhero comic. Just imagine Thor if he was replaced with a leprechaun. Same concept. You have the out-of-place fantasy character in the real world being helped by people to defeat the forces of some fantasy evil. Where the fuck is the mean-spirited little jokester that just fucks with everybody for no other reason than he can and wants to? Well, I guess there's no time for that when these Dungeons & Dragons dorks are jizzing all over a tried-and-true horror icon with their wizards and warriors. Now, what's worse is this actually ended like it was a pilot for a whole fucking series. The leprechaun finds out the bad guys have cursed his gold, and if he doesn't retrieve all the pieces within a year, he'll die. Now that everyone's targeted by Middle-earth rejects, they'll help Leprechaun regain his power with every piece of gold they find until they collect them all and vanquish the evil or whatever they are. Epic fail! Like I said, this really needed to be its own comic with some other original character instead of dragging horror fans into this mom's basement of a fantasy wet dream. Now, there is one other publication I've seen around that's advertised as Leprechaun and Warlock, but I really think this is just collecting those two different miniseries into a single volume as opposed to a versus story, which would make way more sense to come out with. But actually, I take that back. I'd rather see Leprechaun versus Wishmaster. That Could be cool. But what do I know? I like killers made of movies. I'll see you later, Scream Freaks.
You wanna scream,